Sánchez-Jankowski for his deliberation.
I want to thank all of you for coming today. I have a great deal to talk to you about, and I think you should concentrate on the fact that I'm going to talk to you about things, but not to you, in the sense that I'm going to tell you what to do, but I'll have a little bit more to say about that. I hope to confine my remarks to a reasonable time so that we have a reasonable time allowed for you to ask me questions and we can have a dialogue. The most exciting parts about these presentations is the fact that we have a dialogue between you and I, in which we together work things out, or at least know the parameters at which we need to actually address. I do want to say that I realize that all of you are probably hungry at this time, and your stomachs are telling you that you need to go for lunch, and I hope you won't take that out on me while I'm talking, but it's not my fault. I want to blame Dr. Shekhar and Dr. Dutta for giving me this position. I want to tell you a little bit about myself so you have an idea about where I'm coming from and what my expertise is. I did political science and economics at MIT, and I've always been in the area of development with essentially low income. I'm not going to just say poverty because poverty is a relative term and it's determined by each country about who becomes poor and who doesn't. But I think we should all become aware that even if you don't meet the criteria for being poor and you're low income, 200% of the poverty rate, you're still struggling. And so we need to actually deal with people who are low income. The second thing I really want to say to you today is that if I were in your seats and not mine, one thing that would be very irritating to me would be that to have a speaker speak to you and telling you what to do. I'm not going to do that. That would be inefficient. It would not even be something that was appropriate. I'm going to actually suggest challenges to you that will need to be worked out. Now, where do I get these challenges from? And these challenges address people who are low income, not only in the United States or many of the areas what we call developed, as opposed to those who are in the process of becoming more developed. So they are shared by people in every country. And I offer them to you as as challenges in which you will need to work out your own solutions to. Now, my expertise is this. Many of you know in the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, there are lots of research being done on what to do, when, where, and how. And those organizations are essentially designed as just like the Center for Disease Control in terms of world epidemics. You have people who are doing statistics and econometric analyses. And I, of course, was trained in mathematics in terms of political theory and in econometrics. And then you have those people are going to tell you what the extent of the disease is, how many people have it, how intense it is, etc. But in order to have an effective policy, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund said, we also have to have people who go to site and see how it is working out, how the actual disease is working on the ground. We won't be able to have an effective policy unless we do that. And they call those people in the medical field bug cowboys. I am one of the bug cowboys, but in the poverty range. So what do I do for the 40 years that I have been doing this research? I live with the poor, not in a nice hotel and visit them during the day, but actually live there in whatever project that I'm involved in. So if I'm in a slum, I'm in a slum. I'm living there too. There's no way in which I can tell how they're working out in a 24-hour day if I'm not there 24 hours. I need to speak into this, I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Can you add this thing with you?
Sure. Instead?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I want to share with you today is those experiences that take place that I've lived in Africa, in South America, in the United States, in some parts of Asia, in Oceania, believe it or not. So I've been in all of those places, and I've lived in the most poorest places of those. And I want to share with you today some of the things that I've actually learned. But I'm going to focus my remarks on education. There are two real reasons why why we think education is important. One is that we associate it with creating new knowledge. That's a universal thing. But the second one is much more functional. And that is, we think of it as being important to create a more vibrant economy. And we think it's more vibrant economy because we want to produce a large pool of people who have large human capital. And we think that the larger the pool of human capital that is broad enough to facilitate new ventures in economics, that is in businesses, and economic production and expansion is important for the development of every society. So I'm going to talk about education as it applies to each and every one of you in terms of human capital. Because if there's one thing we learned, if we just do education to present knowledge without presenting you with human capital for a marketplace, if we do the first and not the second, what we actually create is social disillusionment, that is conflict and disorder. So the importance for every one of you, including myself, is education as human capital. Because we live in a capitalist society. It is run by markets. And we will have to go to one of those markets. There is no way to avoid it. And in a market, there are just so many people who will be able to get positions in them. I look at this audience, and I want to use this as the analogy. Whether it's school or this presentation now, there are just so many chairs. And the people who didn't get them are on the outside, and I'm looking at them, and they have to wait to get a chair for somebody who wants to get up, or somebody who is asked to leave, before that chair becomes available. And the other way they can be in here is actually if we expand the walls. But in order to expand the walls, we have to have investment and capital to do so. Dr. Shikar would tell you that. We can expand those wells, but who's going to pay for it? And then we can have more seats. So this auditorium is like the economy. You've got to have it expanded if you're going to have more people involved in it. And the way you can get more people involved in it is expand the markets. And the way you expand the markets, you get more investment. And the way you can get more investment is that you have people who have expertise. What is expertise? Human capital. Every one of you in this room will have to go to a market. So what I'm talking about are the people who come from low incomes. Now, what you might really, I told you what I do for research, but I haven't told you anything about myself. I actually come from a low-income, poor family. My origins are actually Mexican, but I am an American citizen, so I'm Mexican-American. But the fact of the matter is, so I grew up that. And what Dr. Dutta and Dr. Shkar is telling you is, it's possible to become and stand in front of you, but that is something that is predicated on the economic system and the educational system that feeds it. And I want to talk to you today, even if you somehow accept that, about the challenges that both you face, but other people, or the society faces, in expanding this room, expanding colleges that get more seats, to expand them so they can actually become places where you increase your human capital. I want to talk to you a little bit now about what human capital is. What you will get in school are knowledge and skills. One thing we've learned everywhere in the world, and particularly in the United States, is that you can have knowledge, but if you don't know how to use it, it simply is not going to be functional for you in the market. Skills is a word, but it has many elements to it. It's how to take information and actually use it. To take the geometry you learned and apply it to economics. It is a skill in which you have to make the transitions. This doesn't come to anybody naturally. It has to be taught. A child does not learn language on its own. It doesn't come from the mom already knowing how to speak. It actually has to be learned. You have to think about it that way. And you have to have two things that you also have to bear in mind. To get skills, whether we were talking about cricket, football, or your education, you've got to not only know the stuff, you've got to practice it over and over and over again. That is the kind of thing that you want to build. Now, let me share you something about America, and before I get to the challenges that face every one of us in society. Education has really changed in America. I have been teaching at Berkeley for 41 years, and the undergraduates that have come to me are so different now than they were before. Your generation. They are so different. And it means that we can't lament and say, oh, it was better before. But that is meaningless to your generation. It's meaningless. Our idea is we have to adapt to you in your world, not you have to adapt to our world. And understanding that means we have a challenge. We not only have a challenge, we have to know you. We have to know what's out there for you. We have to know what you're facing in order to accommodate that in a productive way. So that's one of the things that I would say to all of you. You must actually have the idea that it's skills, how to work with skills. If I told you that if you were poor and you went into a hospital, the issue isn't that somebody knows where the hospital is. There's a lot of things that have to go in when you walk through the door. Where do I actually go first? Who is the doctor? How is the doctor? What kind of doctor? These are all skills that you cannot take for granted. So whatever you're doing now, remember skills are important. In the United States right now, when we're teaching students, undergraduate students, what we're trying to say is not to generate, I know this is going to sound really odd, particularly because you're in the academy. We're not there trying to have you develop new ideas. We're not there fostering the idea that in order for you to be successful in the marketplace, you have to come up with a new idea. Because businesses in the United States don't care about new ideas. They did in 1950. They did in 1960. They did in 1970. They don't now. What they care about is, can you think? Can you actually execute something? And they're going to say, I don't need new ideas. I will tell you what I need. I need you to be able to do them. That's what you must remember. That's your world. That's a different world than I grew up in, when you had to have new ideas. The business was looking for a new idea so it expands. That is not the business world at the moment. That is not where they're at. So all of us had to adapt. Now, I could lament, and I could tell you this right now, but it'll have to do with the next things I'm going to actually tell you about, the challenges. My students at the University of California at Berkeley, which is an elite school in the United States, they don't read well. Now, do they read? Yes. But I'll tell you what happens is that your world and that phone that you get information on really, really quick is the way in which you're actually getting information and even deciphering it. Reading a whole book drives you nuts, drives my students nuts, because one of the skills that everybody takes for granted, and maybe all of you here, but it's not going down in the other parts of the world, is that in order for you to read a whole book, the one skill that you just take for granted and don't know it's a skill, you got to be able to sit for a long time. You got to be able to sit. And one thing we've known about people who are poor, they have a harder time sitting. And why? Because their moms, dads, and their lives are physical. Their whole idea is physical. It's not intellectual. It is not in their heads. It's out there being physical. So our challenge is how to deal with that kid. If we're going to actually make the kid actually have an accumulated human capital to be successful. Now, the other thing I want to tell you is there's no science that supports the idea that everybody, that if you're not successful and you start off poor, you're not as smart as somebody who was middle class. There's no evidence for that. But it does mean we have challenges because there's a big difference. And let me start off with something that most people don't understand, but except for us in the poverty area. The poor, no matter where they are in the world, have more in common with each other than they do in each of their countries between themselves and the middle class. So one thing you need to understand, I talk to, poor people are not middle class people without money. Think about that for a second. Yes, they're all human, but they're not middle class people without money, which means if you just give them money, they'll spend it like a middle class person. They won't. If I told you about a soldier who went off to war, he's not or she's not the same as somebody who didn't go to war. They're not the same. And you need to actually understand that. In America, America thinks that a poor person is simply a middle class person without money. That's just not it. And that's what our challenges are. They're not less, they just have challenges that the others don't have. Now, what are the challenges that you and I often face? The first, actually, I would say to you is this. There's a difference. The biggest challenge out there of the criteria we use to promote somebody from one grade level to the next, and the criteria we use to transition a person from one level to the next. And that tension in the educational sphere starts in the grade school level and goes through actually to the university. Promoting somebody from one grade to a level can be done for various reasons. They went to class, they did okay, or they didn't make trouble, and we just let them go to the next level. Because we said at a certain age level, they need to go to the next level, which means we gave them all this. The second is, in the United States, and you're poor, perhaps different in India. So remember, I'm not talking, I don't want you to be prejudiced and say, this person doesn't know anything about India, I'm not listening to them. Because I'm not trying to tell you what's in India. I'm telling you there are some things that I'm saying that will be applicable to India, but not necessarily that it's here. But let's take the person in the United States who's low income, who can cause all kinds of trouble in the classroom. They cause trouble, they interrupt classes, etc. And they get promoted. In their grade 9, they go to grade 10. How did they get promoted? Because the teachers teaching them cannot stand them. And they're causing so much trouble in their classroom, they just say, let the next teacher handle them. I don't want to do it. That's a reality, not just a funny joke. That's a reality that we face in America, and it's faced in Africa, and it's faced in other places as well. Now, what I'm saying is we really have to be concerned with not promotion, but we have to be concerned in transition. What does transition mean? For each one of us, you out there and me, if we are actually transitioning to the next level, it means that we have moved to the next level and we are able to competently execute all the tasks in that level. We can competently do it. Then we've made the transition. Otherwise, we've just been promoted. Educators have to be really concerned with that. Not just to promote people, but you have criteria to say, can you transition? Because if you don't transition, you're going to have trouble on the line. Okay, so what are the issues about transitions? I'm going to talk to you about a few that are in a book I recently wrote, and I can't get to the entire thing, but I'll just introduce them to you, and perhaps in the give and take we can expand on them. The first starts, and you can see this in the classroom for the low-income person, starts with what I call the politics of administration. There are certain handicaps for administrators. The one thing we ought to understand is you don't become just an administrator out of nowhere. Either seniority system, there's politics involved. Somebody decides who gets the job and who doesn't. You have issues of obligation once that happens. And you actually have a great deal of pressure on the person who's now in an administrative role. If they want to continue with administrative role, they've got to be aware of interests out there that have actually placed them in the position they are. They've got to manage that. And believe it or not, the management of that, and the mismanagement of that goes all the way to the classroom by who they actually hire along the lines in terms of principals, etc. And the biggest thing in almost all the world is administrators, no matter who they are, believe in two things that they must actually always be aware of. One is that they don't mismanage funds. That's one, to protect themselves. And the second is that there's no social disorder in the classrooms, etc., or that there's bad publicity. Managing that. But if that's your thing, rather than education, rather than practicality, you can see that it can have an impact on it. So actually having policies that are done at this level is something that has to be actually addressed. The second I want to talk to you about is the tension between home and school. This is a challenge, people. because both depend on each other. The home, for somebody who's low income, offers their child to the school. They present the child to school and give the school the entire obligation of educating that person. The school, on the other hand, only has that child for a limited amount of time. That's when all the education is actually going to be presented in the skills. But if any of you know, if you come from the middle classes, what you had that they don't have, and that's the challenge, you had parents who could help you. So that education really didn't stop at the school, it actually continued. The practice that I talked about in the first part of my remarks was going on after school with your parents. You don't have that. You've got to have policies, you've got to have strategies to make up for that. I'm not telling you what they should be, but you have to think this way. If you have homes who parents are not educated at all, if a kid has problems, if a kid says to her, I don't know how to work this algebra problem, Mom, can you help me? Mom can't help. Doesn't mean that Mom doesn't want to help, but Mom can't help. My kids said they had problems and I could help. My parents could not help me. That means as a society and as a system, we've got to have strategies to address this. How? That's up to you. The way in which you'll decide that is up to you. The second I would say to you has to do with what I would say to you is school organization. And I'm trying to run through this very quick. American schools are organized along these ways. And I didn't say you should do American schools, I'm just saying what the problem is. You have people who have different skill levels. You go back to what I said, it isn't that they're less smart, they just have different skill levels. So what we have to understand is there are kids who have higher skill levels. Sometimes we call them gifted. Some are really intellectually gifted. Some are gifted in skill levels. We have a real tension there between whether they're low caste. We don't want to deter that child. So in America, we have actually, if you pardon me for this, we have a stratification system. We actually have schools that actually do the gifted, or we have criteria in that are what we actually separate the kids out in terms of criteria in grade 9, and some are in average college recorded courses, and some are actually in what we call skill levels, or things that are done like plumbers, etc. The real issue there is we have to encourage both of them, but what was a real problem is when do we believe somebody who we put at a lower level for a skill level, when do they get up to that level where they should be able to be promoted to the upper level? We have to have criteria for that. Otherwise, we've simply, on the first decision, we placed them in jail that they can never get out of. And the poor often are in that. That's one thing we have to work out. Tracks. How to actually have different tracks for people where we're encouraging both of them. We have to encourage more skill development and how we manage that in terms of resources and the fact that we can actually transition a kid. Otherwise, they will be frustrated and they will do the same thing their parents did and they'll continue to do that. The other one is what I have called, and many of you in sociology will know because it's related to a famous French sociologist, and I know him in an institution that had French origins, and that is Pierre Bourdieu. And the issue really is about social and cultural capital and the meaning of that for education. Social capital comes down to one basic thing, networks. Who you know. And you often, in America, they say it's who you know, not what you know, that gets you the job. And in some ways, after you know a lot, it's true. But if you're in school here or you're in the lower schools, who you know does matter. If you actually have issues about learning something and you don't know the answer and your parents can't give you the answer, then who you know in your network does matter because they can help you. And what I've been able to show graphically and statistically is if I take a blueprint of people who are successful, their network is broad enough that actually it substitutes for areas that they're more weak in. So making networks, extending out your networks, increasing your friends and who you know increases your chances of developing more human capital, without a doubt. So the social capital is related to human capital. The other is cultural capital. And here I don't know much about India in terms of the cultural capital issue, but you'll know what I'm talking about. The way you talk, the etiquette that you know, is often class-based. People can tell what class you're in by the way you talk. You can do that in the United States. I can't imagine that it does not occur here. And then the question is, what role does school play in that? So when somebody is talking in what somebody can identify as a lower class, the educator, it is very important for the educator who knows what the norm of society is to correct them. But in the United States, we're so worried about offending them, the educators often don't correct them. But if you don't correct them, when you learn a foreign language, it's very important to be corrected. If you don't correct them and you carry that on, whether you were in England or not, that prejudice actually matters. It matters in the United States, so it matters in the developing world. In the developed world, it can't possibly not matter in the developing world. That's part of education too. How do you do that? The way we've decided to actually do it in the United States is to say we call it code switching. That is, we've encouraged the students to think of it as bilingualism. They have actually a way in which they talk actually in their own environment, but when they go to the middle class environment, they can switch. But it has to be taught that they can do that. So we've sold them, not that their actual education in low-income areas or their language is not good, but that they can switch. And we all know languages change a great deal. I mean, my kids every morning, or when they do call me, I always say, I answer the telephone and say, "What's up?" So I often used to answer, "I'm up," because I thought that's what they were asking me. Are you so old that you can't get up? I'm up. But that's not what they were asking me. What's going on? So you got to be aware that these things are actually changing all the time and be aware of what you can do with language in order to make it accommodating, because it's all human capital. I've gone completely in a circle now. And how you speak, what the etiquette, what you know in terms of etiquette, of what to do and when to do it, matters, because in the business world, they want to actually be firmly fit. They do not want you to be an outlier. They do not want you to actually be somebody who doesn't make their customers feel comfortable. It matters. It matters for all of you who are actually sitting here compared to the people who are not sitting here. And you certainly can imagine that. In every society I've been in, it matters. So cultural capital, social capital really matters. I could say a lot more about that, but in the end, they are challenges for us. And the challenges, what you have to understand is the challenges never actually go away. There will be a new set of challenges. And that's what I want to encourage you to know. You'll never solve the problem, totally. You'll never be able to do that. There will always be new challenges. Now, one of the things I want to end with is this. Education is terribly important. And one of the things that's not a problem with people wanting to do the right thing but we haven't been, in terms of foresight, we haven't had enough people doing reconnaissance about the newest things going out, so that what we're teaching you for human capital, if you're young, and there are a number of you are, that we don't train you for a job that actually is going to be obsolete. That we're actually training for the job that you're actually flexible enough to get in the future. We can't talk futures, the people are talking about what the future rise. The future essentially is multiple todays. So we really have to be aware of that. And we have to be actually expanding that. And we haven't had enough reconnaissance. One of the things I would say for every society is that you have enough reconnaissance, that you know what's going on. And last, but certainly not least, for all of you, one of the things that's happened in the United States and every other country is many of you are enormously successful and will become successful. And when you go on the international labor market, you're actually very attractive and you leave India. But if we're talking about societies in which it is, that hasn't helped India. It has helped you, but it hasn't helped India very much. We've had this issue with people who have gone a long way. So the real issue here is building this wall long enough so you don't have to leave unless you want to leave. That you're not forced out because you didn't have anything here. This is really terribly important, and keeping you in a place that you want to be rather than you can't be is, I think, part of the building the human capital issue. So do not take human capital actually for granted. Don't say you just owned it because you're going to live it. And you're going to live it in the ways in which you meet. And the more skills you have, the more knowledge you have, the better chances you'll have in this market. Because what things about a market is, it does not guarantee success. It guarantees an opportunity for you to be in that market and be successful. It doesn't say you're going to be there. So competition is going to be there for you. And having to develop these skills and getting more and more people with skills doesn't mean that you have to have losers all the time. That doesn't mean that the loss has to be enormous, like before. It means you're trying to incorporate, you're trying to build this wall so there's more and more seats and more people actually having this opportunity. So these are the challenges I've asked you to think about, challenges that you'll work out yourself, challenges that you can pass on to people who make decisions. This is part of being a citizen. This is part of things that we all want to encourage in our young people and people in general. So what I've actually offered you today is, and I can speak much more technically about it, is that you have these challenges and you have to know that it faces people less if you're in the middle classes and more if you're in the lower classes, but a healthy society is one in which it actually gets more and more people involved in it, that they feel there's a future. And as much of you came here today and think of it as a future, you can say, and with your horizons are larger, you have to know that there are people whose horizons are actually more constrained. And what we want to do is actually slowly, we cannot do it overnight. It is not going to happen. You have to slowly allow more and more people whose horizons are broad. Let's leave you with that positive note. Okay? Thank you very much for this.